Well, here we are. Esther exposes Haman's treachery. And then we'll have one more session. But I thought of the light in the darkness. And you know the Bible says in Ephesians 5, don't participate in the evil deeds of darkness, but what? Rather expose them. That is, bring them into the light. Help them to be seen for what they are. And that's exactly what happened here. So, chapter 5. We will start by asking you for your comments and thoughts as you have considered this passage. Esther's successful approach, the first banquet, we might talk about why she had two and not just one, and then Haman's vicious plot. Anyone, what have you discovered? What would you share with us? You know, once the ball gets rolling, several are going to want to talk, so why don't you start us out, someone? Okay, Kathleen? Okay, the first was like a volleyball. For set it up, get ready, so the next move can spike it, right? Yes, kind of get the king there, get Haman there, even in front of the wicked enemy to lay this out. It also has a way of boosting Haman's ego even further, doesn't it? The balloon gets more and more air before it pops. And he walks away to, who else of all the people she could have had? You know, she invited me. Yeah, Greg? After she fasted. Yes. She had made the decision ahead of time, and then after the 3 days of fast, then she proceeded. Greg responded to the blog post. Thanks for your comment. And I think he quoted someone that said you can pray without fasting, but you can't fast without praying. I thought that's remarkable. Fasting is such a powerful way of setting aside what we normally depend on and saying, man doesn't live by bread alone. I need to feed on the things of God and the will of God. I need to talk with God and learn from the Word of God. Good. Anybody else? Okay. So it's a courageous act. It's going to start to turn the tables on the wicked Haman and deliver all the Jews throughout the entire Persian Empire. So she approaches the king. She doesn't know if she'll live or die. The king welcomed her. They came to her banquet, he and Haman. Haman goes home celebrating his successes. He gets all his achievements like the narcissist he is, you know. Look, how his favorite song is How Great I Am, right? And so they say, hey, you want to get rid of this Mordecai? He's still under your skin. He still bugs you, irritates you. Build a gallows. And the gallows seems to have been more of a stake. And we think of a gallows like a big deal, you know, you go up on a platform and noose and drop all that. But more like a stake on which a person would be impaled. So it's a horrible, painful, disgusting, disgraceful way to die. But that gives him a thrill. He reminded me of Herodias in Mark chapter 6, who let her anger against John the Baptist, you know, burn and burn and burn. Put him in prison. Oh, now what do you want? Bring me his head on a platter. That's what happens when you nurse a grudge and you don't resolve it and you let one person become, you know, if a person gets very close, that's all you see is that one person and lose sight of everything else. So look at chapter 5, verse 1. The third day, she put on her royal robes. I noticed that she put her best foot forward. She appeared well. Her queenly garments would have shown that this is serious, this is major. She's not just casually stopping in. So inner court, in front of the king's rooms, the king sitting on his throne, opposite the entrance. The king saw Esther the queen. She obtained favor in his sight. That's what you read about Joseph. Remember how Joseph, when he was sold by his brothers, everywhere he goes, he receives favor in the sight of Potiphar. And then after he's falsely accused and thrown into prison, around chapter 39 of Genesis, he becomes like the chief prisoner in charge of everybody else. And then, of course, with Pharaoh, he rises to second in command of Egypt. So there's a scripture in Proverbs that says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, He makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Now, that's a general maxim. It doesn't always happen exactly that way. But to impress an enemy, when a person walks with God, often it can have that effect. So, what is troubling you, Queen Esther? Verse 3. What's your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be given to you. So it must have been written all over Esther's face, or it must have been the way she walked, her demeanor, perhaps her slow step or whatever. Something like Nehemiah. When Nehemiah came into the presence of this king's father, Artaxerxes, and Nehemiah was never sad in the king's presence as he was his cupbearer. But that one day, Nehemiah's entire countenance, everything that you could read it all over him. And so it seems to be the same with Esther. This phrase, up to half the kingdom, where do you know that phrase from? Again, Herodias, right? Mark 6, Herodias' daughter danced. Herod Antipas, it was. He said, oh, I'll give you whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. And this phrase has been found from other sources also. It may be something of a customary, it's like, whatever you want, I'll give you a blank check. You just tell me, you write the figure and I'll do it. Rather than necessarily being a specific, you're getting 50% stock in the Persian Empire. So all she asks right now is for them to come to this banquet that she's prepared. That's all. Yes, sir, Kent? If it pleases the king, this approach toward God, not my will, but your will be done. Isn't this part, she subjected herself, and it's that submission, that humility, and that lowliness that is so winsome to him. How would you contrast her with the prior queen, Vashti or Vashti? That woman was defiant. She's not going to do what and so the king enraged. But look at how the book of Proverbs says, a soft word breaks the bone. And sometimes gentleness, peacefulness, something like, here's something I want to present, but I realize you're the king and I'm not. Proverbs 15:1, is that the one? A soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. Which one, Donald? A soft tongue turns away wrath. Harsh words stir up anger. Proverbs 15:1. Yeah, very good. So what if we prayed this way? And we do, don't we, Ken? If it pleases the king. Right? Anybody else? Okay, so you have this successful approach. We talked about her appearance, her submission, her pain that he can see and detect, and then her step-by-step plan. It seems like, Greg, during these 3 days, she's prepared. And she knows, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I think Corey Roper suggested that the banquet was already prepared. Because she says, come to a banquet that I have prepared. So that may have been part of the background work that was already set up. Hey, the way to a man's heart is banquet through his stomach, right? Feed him, get him full, and then he's in a good mood, he's comfortable, he's relaxed, and go ahead, Greg. Wine banquet, yes. Happy affair. Yes, yes. Yes, yes. Especially for her, after her 3 days of fasting. And that's right. The Hebrew phrase for the second banquet is that it's a banquet of wine. And you can't help but notice, we'll go on to talk about the first banquet, the part that wine apparently played in all of this. Let's see, as they drank their wine, Wine drinking was a common practice among the Persians. You can read Esther 1, 7 and 8. Remember Vashti, the first queen. Remember all that day after day after day. And so that may have made the king more agreeable and reduced his resistance. And then I added the note, that's a good reason to stay away from it, right? If alcohol has that effect, however Esther may have used it, it's a good reminder to stay away and abstain and stay sober. I always tell people the older I get, the more I want to keep all my faculties. Would you agree with that? I don't want anything to numb or weaken my judgment or my alertness. And so that's a good reminder. Any more thoughts about that? Yeah, go ahead, Ken. Yeah, what's with the 3 days? Here we're not given a reason. Would that be, we do know that fasting would typically have a set time, sometimes longer than that, perhaps sometimes shorter. The Jews had 1 day a year they were required to fast, and that was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Many of their other occasions were feasting instead. So I don't think we're told, but it's an interesting thought, 3 days. Ken's raised a good question. He said, is that related to, for example, Jesus' 3 days, death, burial, and resurrection? You think about things like that. Well, there's 3 days here, 3 days there. And yet we're careful. We're careful with that because the Bible doesn't make that connection. So we can conjecture, we can think about those things, and there's no harm in doing that. Yes? 3, 7, and 40. They're replete all the way through the Bible. And 3, do we still say third time's the charm? Where does that come from? How many of us think a fourth time? I don't know. Interesting. These numbers do reoccur. You know, I'm reminded of the Gospel of John toward the end when there's the second miraculous catch of fish. How many fish did they catch? 153. So sometimes there are people that say, wow, 153, that means this, that means this. Could be a simple statement, there were 153 fish. So I'm just saying, it's interesting to think about the numbers reoccurring in different parts of the Bible, but don't necessarily assume that there's some symbolic significance. We know there is in Revelation, but here we're just told it's 3 days. Good question. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Steve? God-fearing person believes they're doing God's will. I'm so glad you brought that out. She has to use her wisdom and her faith and her dependence on God. She doesn't have a voice telling her. Isn't it interesting, too, Steve, that you see the casting of lots sometimes? Esther didn't cast lots for this particular decision. She thought about it, she worked through it, and she made the choice that would glorify God, that would express her faith, that would be the hard decision and involve risk and possible danger and death. And look how God blessed her. And we're in the same position, Steve said. We don't have a directive for every choice. And so it's part of our growing relationship with God to try to gain wisdom. I see another hand over here. No, okay. Greg?
I think of Abraham.
Abraham. God told him. On faith. He had no map. He had no map. And as a man, would he have followed a map if he'd had one? We don't know. We're not told. We're not told. Okay. I remember an older brother. He was an elder elsewhere. He's passed away now, but he was offered a GPS for his car. He said, I don't need anybody else telling me which way to drive, you know. So that's the way it is sometimes. Okay, so at the first banquet, like we said, Kathleen mentioned setting the stage, the volleyball, I like that. Inviting the enemy, get him right there, you know, and preparing the king. So they bring Haman, this is verse 5. They're drinking the wine, there's another mention of that. Again, up to half the kingdom. And she says, if I've found favor, that's what Kent was talking about, if it pleases the king, come to the banquet that I'll prepare for them tomorrow, and then I'll do as the king says. So now we're going to find out about Haman's vicious plot. Is he happy or sad? Yes. What's he excited about? Ta-da, 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 right? I'm top of the food chain. I get to go to this banquet not just once, but twice. He just feels buttons popping off, you know, his pride, his chest. And so glad and pleased of heart. Why is he miserable? What's that?
Yeah, verse 13.
Mm-hmm.
He's not satiated.
That's right, that's right.
Just can't possibly achieve it because it says, I've got all these things, but
I've got all this.
it's not enough.
That's right. That's right. Look at verse 11, how he gets his wife and his friends together and starts talking about and singing his song, How Great I Am. Look how rich I am. See verse 11? Look how many sons I have. Look, every time he's notched his belt. Every time the king has given him some kind of promotion. And all the princes and the servants, he's higher, you know. And here, this is the way he measures his life. By his money, by his status, by his popularity, by how many people will jump at his command. Is that typical of people? Beauty, brains, and bankroll. The 3 B's. And people measure, what'd they say? Whoever dies with the most toys wins. You ever hear that? So here, Haman's basically saying, look at my toy. Let me take you into my closet, show you my toy collection. And they're supposed to be so impressed. But he's not satisfied. Verse 13. Why? That Mordecai. Oh, that Mordecai. Have the whole world at my feet, but unless I have him surrender to me, I am filled with anger. That's verse 9. So he's going home from the banquet. Who's sitting at the king's gate? Mordecai. Mordecai won't stand up or tremble. Verse 9. Haman controlled himself. I wonder if he wanted to strike Mordecai or something. Goes home, gets his friends and his wife, which is what people do. Who's the support team? Who's the network? Who are the people on my side? When there's a conflict, hey, let me get my little group together here and be sure that they know I'm the one that's right. I deserve better. And so even Esther the queen wouldn't let anyone but me come, and I get to go to another banquet tomorrow. But I'm not satisfied. So Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends. What's the solution? Build a gallows. Hang them high. You've heard that phrase, you know. Let's do something. And apparently, this 50 cubits, we say that a cubit was the length from the king's elbow to the tip of his longest finger. And so we estimate about 18 inches. And so 75 feet high, way higher than you'd need to, impale a man. Maybe the idea was put it up, like I said, hang them high. Put it up and make a spectacle. And want to be fun, want to be great. Want you to feel so much better to see your enemy hanging in front of the whole city, capital of Susa. Your thoughts? I want you to think about anger. I want you to think about making one person control your thoughts and your actions and take away your joy. I want you to think about vindictiveness and revenge, like we talked about in Romans 12. Don't seek your own revenge. Leave room for the wrath of God. What are your comments? I want to say, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. If you've ever let one person destroy your joy, if you've ever allowed some irritation, something that was said about you or done to you or to consume you and to keep you from being effective for Christ, take the peace and strength and confidence away from you. Has that ever happened to you? You don't have to answer. Any other comments that you have? Yeah, Deanna? You can only control your response to things. You can't determine what's done to you, but what you do next. Like drinking poison. That's right. Someone says, I'm going to drink this poison and hope he dies. Because that's what happens when we're bitter. We let this fire, we let this fury get hold of us, and next thing we know, that person's gone on their way. They're probably not thinking another thing about it. And here we are just eaten up with what we're doing to ourselves. Good. So true. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead. What you've done. Okay. And that, I almost said that. I don't want to be that person that destroys another person and trips them up. You know, the Bible says, I think it's in Romans 14, let us determine this, not to put a stumbling block in a brother's way. Yes. And not to make ourselves so important like Haman did. Not to make ourselves so important that we think everybody else ought to acknowledge us. You know, we walk into the room, everybody ought to, you know, appreciate us and greet us and all this kind of thing. We all need some of that. But ego is such a easily inflated part of us, can destroy us. God exalts the humble. God gives grace to the humble. And he resists the proud. James 4, around verse 7. Anybody else? Both his joy and his sorrow are dependent on how others treat him. His remedy, counting his toys, riches, sons, and promotions. Okay. So here we mention the gallus. The word rendered gallus is the typical term for wood or a tree. And I think it's translated as gallus because it's something on which a man is going to be hanged. But again, it carries a picture that may not be exactly what is intended there in terms of a stake. And I said ugh. I couldn't resist writing ugh because the very picture of that is gruesome. Yeah, how could that bring anyone pleasure to see a person die that way? Premeditation.
Think of the fact they didn't have hydraulics like we have.
Yes.
So to do 7
Didn't have hydraulics. Yeah, 7 stories, 75 feet high. Many men and a lot of money and a lot of trees. Build this, build this, build this, build this. Yes. All for one person. So Mordecai could think, I must be pretty important if they're doing all this just to kill me, right? Wow. It shows the extent, doesn't it, Myron? The extent that people will go to when they're just consumed by the desire to retaliate. Yes? Yeah, or hanging them from the tree, yes. Yes. Yes, that's right. That's right. Horrible, cruel. Okay, looking at takeaways then. Well, you mentioned several. Feel free to jump in again. Best foot forward. You're going to meet somebody. Maybe it's an interview, whatever the occasion might be. You know, they say clothes make the man, and we say, well, don't make everything about the outward appearance. We understand that. We understand that. But that doesn't mean you have to look like a slob, and it doesn't mean that you have to turn people off by the way you appear. Is that right? So she puts on her robes. So look your best, speak your best, and act your best, and you're more likely to create an environment where good things can come, right? Okay. So then best face forward. I noticed the other side of that. She didn't pretend to be delighted. She didn't wear a mask. She didn't act, everything's okay, everything. We got to be careful for that too. If you're hurting, if you're struggling, if you're tempted, if your faith is weakening, you need to let others of us know. Let others of us know. Be transparent, be vulnerable. You know, our society's not very good with that. Maybe males more than females want to cover up as if, I can fix this, everything's going to be fine. But you have to appreciate Esther and the fact that her grief and her concern were evident. People can't help you if they don't know you're hurting. And then I thought about best prep forward, and that is a step-by-step plan. Not haphazard. She's going to do this, and then what are you going to do today? Oh, I'm going to make a banquet. I'm going to invite them to come. What are you going to do next? I'm going to invite them to come again. What are you going to do at that banquet? I'm going to expose this villain. All right, best focus forward. Count your blessings instead of your foes. Not applauding Haman here. I'm not saying your toys and all that. I'm just saying that if you count God's goodness to you, then you'll find you don't have room for a lot of animosity or a lot of upset. You kind of flush that out by filling yourself with something else. I also have learned to value criticism. And if you're criticized and something is valid, then act on it. Consider the source, yes, but don't dismiss what might be legitimate just because of the source that it came from. Take what critics tell you, invite encouraging responses that might help you improve, and learn from it. Okay, and then I thought about best counsel forward. Who are Haman's advisors? His wife and his friends. What are they going to tell him? They're a bunch of yes people, aren't they? Yes, 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 yes. You know, I mean, he's their breadwinner. He's the one with the money, apparently. He's the one in power. Are they really going to take him on and say, Haman, you're letting your pride get the best of you? Let it go. No, instead, build this 75-foot tall structure and get even with him. So I listed some proverbs, these were in your notes, that have to do with wise counsel. People you listen to. Someone said you'll become like the 5 people you spend the most time with in your life, or the 5 people you listen to the most or interact with. So if the counsel you get is revenge, don't respond that way. Revenge will cost you more than it benefits you in the long run. All right, chapter 6, Mordecai's honor and Haman's humiliation. Your feedback. Okay, what leads to Mordecai being honored? What has he done before that now comes into play? Yeah, he exposed a murder plot. He's sitting at the king's gate. He hears the talk, and it's become apparent that the king's life is in danger. And so he gets word, and the king is not endangered or assassinated. If you go back to chapter 2, 21 to 23, there you'll remember again that plot, Mordecai's customary position. He reported the danger to the king through the queen, Esther. And so the would-be attackers had been hanged on a gallows. Apparently that's the way they dealt with such things, just as Haman intended to do. Okay, what next leads to Mordecai's honor? What's the king's problem? Can't sleep. Look at chapter 6 and verse 1. I asked the question, can God use insomnia? So what do you do when you can't sleep? You read history, right? No, you say, I love history, it'll get me excited. So anyway, bring the Chronicles in. So look at chapter 6 and verse 1. He can't sleep. Gives an order, bring the book of records, the Chronicles. There, what Mordecai had reported concerning Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who were doorkeepers that wanted to lay hands on Ahasuerus or Xerxes. And so then the king thinks what? How have we honored this man? He saved my life. Well, we really haven't done anything. And he, in his own conscience, in his own mindset, knows that good deeds should be rewarded. So, what are we going to do? Well, who's that walking out in the courtyard? Haman. Haman, hey, Haman, come over here. What do you think should be done for the person that the king needs to honor? And what does Haman think? Right. So what does he say? Get this man a royal garment that the king has worn. Put him on a horse that the king has ridden. Give him a crown that the king has worn. And let one of the nobles lead him through the city and say, thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor. And the king says, great, do that for Mordecai. So who becomes the noble leading the horse? And who is on the horse? And what's the message? Here's what will be done for the one that the king... And all this time, in his soul, he's fuming. He's enraged. He can hardly stand it. And he goes home depressed and sad. What do we call that? Poor baby, poor me, right? And what does his wife say? If Mordecai is of Jewish origin, this will not end well for you. Well, he already knows Mordecai is of Jewish origin. His wife may not know, but as we've seen before, that's his entire rationale for wanting to destroy all of the Jewish people. So Haman could just see himself wearing the robe, the crown, riding a royal a horse, and then being exalted. You just imagine it. But I remember someone saying he was not a legend in his own time. He was a legend in his own mind. And that would not turn out well. What irony. So God's providence, Mordecai did what was good, sowing and reaping. He couldn't have known. He wasn't wanting the horse and the crown and the robe. He just did what was honest and right and supportive of the king. All right, he expected the honor, but he created it. And you have this radical upside down shame and glory. He wants to shame Mordecai, but instead he's shamed. He wants to glorify himself, and yet that will come to his enemy. Yes, sir.
Mordecai's actions and conduct demonstrate that he fears God.
Mordecai's actions, he fears God and he honors the king. Two great qualities. 1 Peter chapter 2.
Mordecai is not saying that he condones everything this king is about.
Right. He's not in favor of everything the king did. This is the right thing. Honor our government. Not agree with everything that's done. But he is still the king. He is in that position. And Mordecai has a responsibility as a result of that. Good. Okay, so the poor me story, and then this time, no sympathy. And I noticed the phrase wise men. I'm not sure I had seen that before. I realized that Haman had his friends, his wife and his friends. Now it says his wise men. And it almost sounds prophetic. Look at verse 13. Wise men and Zeresh his wife, if Mordecai, before whom you've begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him. You will surely fall before him. And so, very serious threat coming there. So, but now they come and they whisk him away hastily, verse 14. The eunuchs come and take him to the banquet. So this is going to be banquet number 2. Takeaways from Esther 6. Short memory. The king. Something good happens to you. Do something to show your appreciation as soon as you can. Answer your emails as quickly as you can, or your text, or some act of kindness. Make a note of it. Don't let it happen to you that one night, much later, I never followed up on that. We've all dropped the ball. I know I have on following up on things, so it's a good reminder. Short nights, you lose sleep, catch up on your reading. Read the Word. Pray. Make that time count. And then short sight. Haman was short-sighted. He couldn't see anything but himself. He was nearsighted. So he credited himself and failed to see the good in others. Short fall. How quickly a moment of fame can turn to death. So don't rely on these momentary highs of life. Don't take anything for granted. Build your hope on things eternal. And then short rise. Here's Mordecai. He's coming very quickly up to the top. Again, like we saw with Joseph. Mary, the mother of Jesus, when she learned she was to be the mother of Christ, said, God has brought down rulers from their thrones, exalted those who were humble. Okay, we'll move on a little bit with that bell ringing. So Esther's second banquet, look at verses 1 through 6. Similar, if I found favor in your sight, Kent brought this out, her lowliness before the king. If it pleases the king, there it is again, chapter 7:3. Let my life be given me as my petition, and my people as my request. We have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Now, if we were being sold as slaves, I would have remained silent. The trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king. That phrase is translated several ways, a little difficult phrase in Hebrew. But what she's saying is, I wouldn't bother you unless this were a very, very serious matter of life and death. I wouldn't trouble you. Then the king said, who is he? So who would presume to do this? And so then she points out Haman. So I noticed that it's the king who asked Esther. Early on, it's Esther coming with a petition to the king. Now his curiosity is aroused, his respect for her, his appreciation for her, and he asked her, what is it? What is it? What is it? And then, when she describes the situation, he asks her again, who is this bad man? Who is this villain? And so then she's going to point him out. Notice her humility, desperation, her connection. Talk about all her people. She's not just pleading for herself. And then her reluctance. I wouldn't bother you if this weren't so critical. And her respect for the king and her assertiveness. Not aggression, but assertiveness is the ability to say, this is the way it is, and present the facts of the situation. Now, all of a sudden, Haman is humiliated. He's in shock. He's groveling before the king. He's terrified. And Xerxes, the king, becomes aware of it. He's filled with anger and swift judgment. So the would-be hanger is hanged on his own gallows. And the tables have been turned because a woman who trusted and feared God, I'm going to have to move on just because of our time. A woman who feared God acted courageously and set in motion a series of actions that brought about that event. So I just noticed two things here. The asker was asked. And so to be the kind of person that others would want to know. What do you think about that? What's your idea? What's your opinion? And then the trapper was trapped. That Mordecai and Haman both reaped what they sowed. There's several scriptures that say, he who digs a pit will fall into it. He who rolls a stone, it will come back on him. Now, Kent, back to you. No one could miss the gallows. It was huge. Yes. Yes. Very good. Kent saying that the gallus was so visible, and everybody's seen it. The eunuch can point it out. Hey, there's a gallus right over there, you know. And what Haman intended to make a spectacle of Mordecai, now everybody knew about it. That's where he'll be. If he hadn't built such a massive structure, it might not have been so evident. Go ahead, Greg.
I wonder if King Xerxes had a memory problem.
King Xerxes' memory problem.
I know he didn't say the people, but
Yes. If he put it together beforehand. You know, it occurred to me, Greg, that before this time, Haman could do no wrong. It seems like he just keeps getting everything added that's good. Now, Haman could do nothing right. And I thought of the tendency we can have sometimes to size up a person and decide that they're either all good or they're all bad. You think that happens to us? And sometimes we prejudice ourselves, maybe based on this or that, and now everything is skewed. Whatever that person does, we're suspicious of it. Or maybe they did something really good, and so we might go the other way. So thank you all for just a great class. Next week we'll conclude this book and also our series. Thank you.